Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Need Some Introduction. In today's episode, we'll be breaking down Your Friends and Neighbors, episode 1 and 2, the new Apple TV Plus series. Here on this podcast, we break down TV shows week to week. Usually, sometimes we are binging a show, sometimes we're watching a movie, but most of the time we are looking for something to watch week to week. And hopefully you come along the ride with us. I prefer to watch week to week and have these conversations with Sona, my co-host.
Hi.
So, first of all, we just wrapped up The White Lotus. Anybody who has watched that show and is new here listening to our coverage of Your Friends and Neighbors, do check that out if you have caught up on that. If not, do check it out because I think you'll be intrigued. If you like this show, you'll be very intrigued with that one. Dealing with some of the same themes of what, you reach middle life and you supposedly are so successful. And the question is, what was it all for? And am I really happy? And of course, a question we are all asking ourselves in our middle lives. And we did have a video episode of that coverage as well. So if you want to see that and you haven't watched it yet, please do check that out. Oh, by the way, had a challenge for the audience to see if we can set a record with our downloads for that show. And what I can say is that it's too early to tell. We know we're only 5 days in. We're not in a week yet. But it does look, Sona, like we are going to have a record for first week. Hard to tell if it's going to be an all-time record, but I'm pretty sure we are going to set a new record for most downloads in a week.
Amazing. We have the best listeners.
We do have the best listeners. And I don't know if it's just additional intrigue around the show and, of course, the wrap-up, which everybody was waiting for that finale, or if it was indeed that everybody out there was recommending us to their friends and family and neighbors, perhaps. If you haven't and you were planning on it, just a reminder to do that and see if we could set a record with those downloads. But like I said, we are ahead of the previous episode, and I think we're on track for a record for at least for the first week. So thanks for listening. Thanks for forwarding us to and sharing us with your relatives, friends, coworkers, neighbors, your friends and neighbors, yourself. A couple more things. We are covering Mobland here, which had a huge premiere last week. I was a little bit shaky on the first episode, more happy with episode 2. So check that out. We have just covered episode 2, Darren and I, on the podcast as well. And I have just watched the first 2 episodes of Black Mirror. I will definitely have an episode early next week where I break down the current season of Black Mirror. If anyone's is a Black Mirror fan, I have also recapped the previous season and almost the entire series itself in old episodes. So do check that out. And of course, this current season, 6 new episodes. I will be breaking them down and in a separate episode early next week, probably Monday. And The Last of Us premieres on Sunday. I will probably be giving my opinion on that. I wasn't even actually going to follow that show. I wasn't 100% sure as to whether I would be going week to week on that one. However, we've been getting a lot of feedback from audience recently, especially with the wrap up of The White Lotus. And everybody is like, are you doing the Last of Us? Are you doing The Last of Us? I'm like, I guess I'm doing The Last of Us. Wasn't a huge fan of season 1, although what an incredibly well-made show. I just don't know if it was differentiated enough from other zombie stories. But I do think season 2 can go in a unique direction. So curious to see that. So I will be following it and expect that coverage here in the podcast as well. Sona, I know you have not watched Black Mirror in the past, but maybe some homework for you and do with this as you will. I was curious to get your feedback on the first episode of this current 7th season. And this is an anthology. You do not need to watch anything else in the Black Mirror universe to watch this. So I'm curious for you to watch it. And I can't tell you why I want you to watch it because it would be a spoiler. So
intriguing.
It's less than an hour long, so it's not a huge time commitment. But I'm curious to see if you watch that because, well, for reasons. So
okay. That seems like a very reasonable ask. So I will try and do that. Rookie question. How do I watch Black Mirror?
Netflix.
Okay. Gotcha.
It started, for anybody who doesn't know, this started 14 years ago as an anthology series in England. Charlie Brooker wrote all the scripts. And I watched these as bootlegs. They were not available in the US for years. And then maybe 7 or 8 years ago, Netflix bought Black Mirror. And they put the old UK shows on and a lot of famous people on there. Daniel Kaluuya, before he was a star. in the first original British shows. Jesse Armstrong, who wrote and created Succession, wrote one of the episodes in that first season. So a lot of really famous people who eventually became very famous, and very famous people behind the scenes. Jon Hamm, by the way, appears in a Christmas episode of season 2. This is when he was still making Mad Men back in the day. He was a big fan of the show, even though it was not available in the United States, probably watching bootlegs just like I was. But yes, then season 3 came to Netflix, got a much bigger budget, all-star cast, a lot of famous people in those. And now they're on season 7 of the show. But these are always just a handful of episodes per season, quote unquote. So I think they're only up to 30 some odd episodes total. So a pretty quick binge for anybody who wants to binge this show. There are Easter eggs if you watch all of it, but you don't need to. So anyway, Sona, I was just curious to see what you think of episode 1 of season 7, which is just premiered this week.
I will check it out.
Okay, great. One last thing I wanted to mention is I had mentioned to you, Sona, Dying for Sex with Michelle Williams, about this woman who gets a cancer diagnosis and deals with it by going on a sexual odyssey late in her life, midlife anyway. I mean, late in her life period, considering her prognosis. I've only seen about half this show, but I think it's very good. It's funny. It is not cynical. It is life-affirming in its strange way. I know some people have bristled at the fact that she, a lot of very conservative folks think that she shouldn't be doing this. It's wrong for her to do this. But I think the show addresses that and her questioning herself in doing this. But it's very entertaining. It's very funny, I think, even given its grim themes. So I would say in general, if this is intriguing to you, I would say check out the pilot episode. The pilot I thought was pretty good. If you like that, the show only gets better after that. So take that with a grain of salt as a recommendation. But so far, I have really enjoyed it. I assume you haven't sampled that yet, Sona. Is that correct?
No, not yet, but it does look pretty interesting. So I may check it out.
Yeah, I recommend it. Okay, this show, Your Friends and Neighbors, Jon Hamm, perfectly cast here, I have to say.
So good.
This is his first starring role since Mad Men, on TV anyway. Obviously, he's made movies. But recently, a lot of television he's been doing. He's on the most recent season of Good Omens on Amazon Prime. He was the villain in the most recent season of Fargo, which is available on Hulu. I'm just shouting all these things out. He was one of the leads in Landman, this season of Landman, which just wrapped up a few weeks ago. And he is also returning for yet another season of the morning show here on Apple TV Plus. I've not watched any of that show, but my wife has watched some of it, I think the first season. And he's back for another season of that. So he's doing a lot of TV, but mostly in supporting roles. And this is his first starring role since Mad Men, of course, his iconic role as Mad Men. And I usually don't like all this narration in the show, I got to say, but it all works perfectly for me here. He's so great in this role. I can't imagine this show working at all without him in the lead role here.
I completely agree with you. First of all, did you watch Mad Men?
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah.
Okay. I kind of wonder if this is is this what would have happened to John Draper if he had to live in 2025?
Right.
I see some parallels, but also completely agree with you. I love this show. I think so much of it is in the brilliance of the casting, because I think it could come across as very heavy-handed, very cutesy, very on the nose. But I think Jon Hamm especially, but all of the actors here are really carrying it and making it fun instead of something that makes you roll your eyes.
I completely agree. The script is maybe the worst part of the show. The concept is fantastic. The script is often so overwritten. It's so on the nose, like you mentioned. And if this cast, and we'll talk about this when we start breaking down the episodes, but for example, that bar scene is great. But
amazing.
it's so stagey. Those are the type of things that when I see them on TV could completely take me out of the experience. And by the way, I can imagine people having that experience, just being like, why are they talking so much? Am I watching a play and being critical of it? And I'm very curious to see what the general audience reaction will be to this. But that scene was fantastic because the performances are so great. That could be a disaster. honestly.
Absolutely.
So before we get into that breakdown, any other general thoughts you wanted to bring up? I totally agree. One of my first talking points is just how great this whole cast is. I mean, across the board, just fantastic cast.
In contrast to, certain shows that we've talked about lately, mainly I'm thinking about Severance, but also, we talked about how this season of White Lotus was kind of, for me, unexpectedly dark.
Mm-hmm.
This is like a fun dark comedy, like I
Mm-hmm.
feel like this is a
So
fun
far.
ride. Yeah, so far. Let's see what happens. I mean, we
Right.
have some idea how
A
this
pretty
might end.
grisly start to the
Yeah,
episode.
but it's very fun. And, I love the way the actors are pulling off this dialogue to make it believable because it is very witty. I can't deny that. But it just, it seems a little bit on the nose, but they're making it work.
So we kick things off this episode, by the way, called This Is What Happens, which he says a couple of times here in this opening, very narrated episode of TV here. We don't hear any music. We just hear him breathing. He's waking up. He's at the bottom of some stairs. But of course, a grisly scene. He is covered in blood. Someone looks like they've been shot in the head, perhaps. He's trying to clean himself up. He finds some bleach.
That seems like a losing endeavor, trying to clean what's going on
Yes.
there with bleach. I think it's so far beyond that. You've got to call a professional, quote unquote, cleaner to help you with that
The
situation.
wolf. You got to get the wolf.
Exactly.
When he was doing this, I was like, is he in his own house? He needs to dispose of that body before he thinks about any kind of cleanup. But I guess
priorities.
I think he's at someone else's house now that I think about it even more. He's cleaning up his footprints. I guess he's cleaning up where he fell in case he left blood, because then he's trying to not leave fingerprints on the handle as he exits. I guess he's just trying to cover his own tracks, but he's doing a terrible job of this. And of course, he ends up falling in the pool. So I'm not sure how he's going to get himself out of this one.
Yeah. And this whole scene, speaking of things that might not work with a different cast and without Jon Hamm, felt very much like that, kind of overdone at this point. You might wonder how I ended up here, right? Yeah. And then like the rewind to 4 months ago.
This has become such a cliche. Breaking Bad's done it recently, but everybody does this now, right? Where the season kind of jumps, fast forwards to the middle of the season, or oftentimes to the end of the season. And then you're like, how did we get here? Yes. Especially when you have, this is really more character driven. This is more of like I wrote down in my notes that this was like Fleischman is in trouble, but with a criminal element to it, right? There's a lot of that aspect to it. Another recommendation here, by the way, excellent show.
So
Fleischman's in trouble. But it very much feels like that, having this existential crisis about your success of all things, and the white people problems, as they say. But it's, legitimate. A lot of us do have those white people problems. And
not me.
You have brown people problems, but they're similar. Yeah. So, I mean, this kind of framing device where they flash forward and then flash back is kind of overdone. Of course, maybe originated with Sunset Boulevard. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but very famously, the opening scene is someone dead drowning in the pool. And then he narrates the movie. This is how I died. But anyway, that's a great film, by the way. If no one's ever seen that, please do track that down. It's old, but it's one of those old films that feels incredibly contemporary. Not so dissimilar from what happens here in this episode. Maybe that's a callback for him falling in the pool. What did you think of this? Like I said, it's kind of a cliche, but I think the show might need it. I'm very intrigued at where we're at this moment and how we get back to this point. They're committing to this. This guy is definitely dead. And he's probably implicated in this in some way.
I liked it. I do agree with you. And I said myself, it's become a bit of a cliche, but I just think Jon Hamm is selling so much of this,
absolutely,
of everything that's gone on in these first 2 episodes. And I love it. He is just such a fun actor to watch.
Yeah. Yes. He's so compelling. I totally agree. And this is, he plays goofy comedy a lot of times because of the Don Draper character. So he tries to lean away from this type of performance. I think this is the first time he's fully embraced it, maybe even more so than Don Draper himself, because Don Draper was more complex. This is the first time he's really just leaning fully into being this type of character. It's using his innate charisma to the nth degree. It's like the perfect casting. Obviously, the rest of the cast as well being so excellent, but I honestly can't imagine this show working without him in it.
The pitch of being one of the most self-aware finance guys I've ever seen in my life.
Right.
It's a little bit hard to believe, to be honest.
Right. Yeah.
But he is making it work.
Yeah, and I'd say I'll give the show credit for that as well. So much of episode 1 feels like it is playing with cliches, and I worried. This works for me. This fantasy, this specific fantasy of someone who is indulging in these excesses, but then self-critical and critical of the culture. It's so convoluted, but it really resonates with me specifically. I feel the critiques of the culture that he has, and of course, at the same time, wallowing in all of this excess as well is very fun to watch. So for me, it works very much as that fantasy. But I did worry a little bit, and for people who've only seen episode 1, the cliches here are so strong, specifically in episode 1. All the women are very one-dimensional stereotypes. He is so put upon, and primarily, this is almost feels misogynistic, primarily put upon by these crazy bitches be crazy, like that's basically the mantra of episode 1. To the show's credit, and I want to shout this out for people who give up after episode 1, to the show's credit, and I assume this is going to continue to happen, when you get to episode 2, you start to see that he's his own worst enemy in a lot of ways. And these women are way more complicated and the things that they want. And they have the same thwarted wants and desires that he has. It's just that in the first episode, we very much are seeing the world from his perspective. And then I think I like that opens up with episode 2.
Yeah, I have a comment about that as well, but I'll hold it. Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think that there's going to be many things to talk about in regard to that. Some people behind the scenes, first of all, directed by Craig Gillespie. He's been around for a while. He made Lars and the Real Girl, which people probably have seen. Many people have seen. He did that Fright Night reboot. So started with horror films and some of these more genre films. But most recently, he's made his reputation making I, Tonya. He directed that Pam and Tommy Hulu series that we watched last year. He made Cruella, which was a huge hit for Disney a few years back during the pandemic. And by the way, he has a lot of visual energy, and you see that here, of course, in the making of the show. So they definitely are bringing some of that. I think on I, Tonya is very much a tight correlation here, although he has reined himself in. Even I, Tonya is, plays it relatively straight, and then it goes way over the top with some real crazy visual flourishes. I haven't seen any of that really hyper kinetic imagery, but under the covers, this is propulsive even when it doesn't need to be. And I think so. There's probably a good choice for him to be directing this. The showrunner here, the writer, is Jonathan Tropper, who's had an interesting career, by the way. There's a movie that came out some 10 years ago now called This Is Where I Leave You, which has Jason Bateman and Tina Fey, Adam Driver, Rose Byrne. It's like an all-star cast. Catherine Hahn. It's a very dysfunctional family. The father dies, and all these kids come back together, and they all have to live under the same roof at the same time. And it's all the dynamics of that. And this was like a semi-autobiographical novel that he wrote. And what's interesting about it is that his novel work is very much like that. These kind of personal, family, complex dynamics. And yet the TV shows that he's produced or he's showrun were Banshee and Warrior, which were both very successful, but both action shows. So I think this is an interesting maybe blend of those two things, because especially with episode 2, we start to see siblings in a dysfunctional family living under the same roof, and it becomes like a theme of the show. So maybe he's blending his novels, which are very much about these inter-family dynamics, and then his TV shows, which have crime figures in them.
I haven't seen that movie, but it sounds amazing.
A lot of people in the room talking to each other about family dynamics. I think you'll appreciate that.
And I will always love Jason Bateman. I'll watch almost anything with Jason Bateman.
Yeah, he's great in it, by the way. Everybody, I mean, that cast is incredible in that movie. The movie's just okay. The cast is really good. So after that shocking opening, we have this very long scene, by the way, which is totally overwritten. I already prefaced that earlier.
I agree, but also so great.
But fantastic, because the performances are so good. And this is Andrew and Liv. Andrew is this, of course, just going through this divorce. He outlines this in great detail during this conversation. It's an exposition dump and a seduction scene and 100 things all happening at the same time here. But it also has some thematics here between the dynamics between a man and a woman, between these generations, generations clashing. And of course, just the perspective of being middle aged versus being young. I really liked the scene, even though it was so on the nose, like you mentioned earlier.
I think it was fantastic. I agree it was overwritten, but it kind of felt like the idea of saying all the stuff out loud that we're always thinking, but no one actually bothers to say about these age gap relationships. As I became middle aged, I understood. I kind of get why a middle aged man is looking for a girl in her 20s.
Right.
I really do. There's just a glow to a woman in her mid 20s, like her whole life is ahead of her. She has not been beaten down yet. Finds everything you say fascinating and
Right.
interesting because, as he so wisely says, I have 2 decades more of stories than you do.
Right. So, of course, I'm
Right?
more
Like,
interesting by
yeah, of
definition.
course it's interesting. That's 20 more years of experience. So I loved how he distilled what this dynamic is about and why it can work for both people for a while, but
Yeah.
inevitably is likely doomed. I loved how he kept referring to her as 27 years old and she kept correcting him that she's
28.
28. I thought it was funny and witty and smart. I loved it.
It's not only a lot of fun, but I do like that they touch on all these themes. Being in the middle age, you do think about these things. You look at younger people and you admire their naivete to some extent to try
Mhm.
things that maybe will all break their hearts someday, but at least they have the willpower to give it a shot. And then, you have that cynical view that he starts to turn it around and be like, well, what's it going to be like in 20 years? And of
Mhm.
course, her saying to him, like, I'm not thinking about 20 years. You're way ahead of me here. Are you looking for your next 20-year marriage? But maybe it does say something about him because we also see this montage of his ascent. And I think subtext to this is the fact that he's truly heartbroken by the breakup with his wife. And I'm not sure if it's specifically his wife, but like you said, it is the whole idea of who you are when you're younger. When you see that whole montage of them in the apartment, and then she moves into the apartment, and then they're having great sex, and they're teammates. They're working together to build this life. They're on the same track. They're supporting each other. They have all these expectations. And while your foot is on the accelerator, and I think we all appreciate this, while your foot's on the accelerator and things keep changing and your life keeps evolving, you don't question whether you're on the right track or wrong track because you have just all this momentum of what's happening. And then the kids come and they get the bigger house and then the bigger house. And then this whole montage hits the brakes when she's cheating on him with one of his best friends.
Mhm.
And again, women in general in this particular episode are seen in negative ways, but then much more complexified, for lack of a better word, in the next episode. But in this moment, it's very much him being the victim of all of this. But I think it's very important that then all of a sudden we smash cut to him renting this house in the same suburban neighborhood, still with a very flashy car though, but in the cheapest house in his particular mega mansion neighborhood that he's living in to be close to the family, which probably still costs a fortune to subsidize yet again another house. You really see that he's probably fallen into a depressive funk and he's blaming her for it. But what's really happened is that he has lost that acceleration of youth, right? And of course, we see that going back to that conversation. It is like he's talking to her. He's talking to that younger version of himself. He's talking to the younger version of his wife. She's like, hold on a second, buddy. I was just looking for some fun.
Uh-huh. First of all, I have to say I love the line when he's talking about when he's younger. No one will ever have sex with you again like she had sex with you in that cheap little apartment.
Yeah.
Not even her.
Not even
I,
her. I thought that
I
was
loved
fantastic.
that.
Exactly. Yes.
And I think it did a lot to build sympathy very quickly
Yep.
for the situation his character is in, because you see how he's been on this treadmill and he's been making it work and he's been moving forward. And, now you're leveraged, which is kind of the same thing as being in
Yes.
debt, but you have something to show for it.
Right.
He's just keeps moving towards that target, which keeps shifting forward more and more. Bigger
Right.
house, another kid,
Mhm.
all of that. And then to have it all come to a screeching halt. I think it did a lot in a very short amount of time
Yep.
to build a solidarity with the character about how devastating that
Right.
is. And now you worked so hard for this big, beautiful house, and your wife is having sex with another man in it and has kicked you out.
And you're living in this, with your fancy car in the smallest house in that same neighborhood. On top of all that, he has like no
Right.
furniture.
Hmm.
He hasn't even decorated the place. So I mean, hopefully, or maybe he's still hoping that this is temporary. But this has been ongoing for a very long time now, over a year, I believe.
I think they said 2 years ago. For
Yeah,
some reason, I think they said that. Yeah.
yeah, I think you're correct. Yeah, he's still holding out hope, perhaps, that this is all going to reverse itself, or maybe he's just in depressed and he's just trapped in this depression. And then, of course, he gets fired by Corbin Burnson here.
Oh my gosh, that's Corbin Burnson?
Yeah, you didn't recognize him?
I did not recognize him at all. And this is someone who's seen every episode of Psych. I got to go back to that.
He supposedly gets fired because of this impropriety with this younger woman. And we discover by episode 2 that that's not the case. But I find it interesting that there is almost like this thematically the rich white guy, like the themes of White Lotus season 1, by the way, is being Me Too'd out of their career and how women are imposing and the younger generation and the changes to the economy. It's basically like a grumpy middle-aged white guy complaint suite in this first episode. But then, of course, we discover, and we'll get to it eventually when we get to episode 2, that this isn't exactly what's happening at all. As a matter of fact, this is just something he's being set up, basically.
And I have a comment about that reveal, but I'll wait.
Was that in episode 2 or episode at the end of episode 1? I think it's the end of episode 1 when that reveal finally comes.
I think it's the end of episode 1. Yeah.
I think there's a couple other things that work really well with the casting of Jon Hamm. And it almost feels like this show probably was written specifically for him, because it's not only the charm, the fact that he can be this scheming guy and even be a bad father oftentimes over the course and be selfish,
but also a good father oftentimes.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we're seeing a very complete character depiction there.
Oh, yeah. I'm not trying to say that he's 100% a bad character or a bad person. I'm just saying that he is oftentimes, he's not the victim that he makes himself out to be in his own narration. You need someone who's charming enough to win you back. And I think he is able to do that. And his charm, obviously, is an innate charisma, has a lot to do with that. But there's other reasons he's so perfectly cast. He does so many TV ads, right? He does all those truck commercials and things. His voice is like recognizable as a spokesperson. So every time he starts to pick up something that he's about to steal and he goes into like advertisement mode, it's so funny.
I hadn't thought of that, but that's a great point.
But he also needs to have some level of soulfulness that you buy into. So, for example, by the end of episode 1, or maybe it's later in episode 2, when he starts to narrate that he's looking at all the people around him caught up in their day-to-day dramas, and he's judging them like, they don't deserve the things they have, which is a criticism that he even makes of himself. That could seem really hypocritical. There is some level, some sense that he is more soulful than just the things he owns, for example. And once again, you need to be able to believe that. I think, once again, perfect casting to have him there in that role.
Agree.
And I think that's maybe the biggest theme we see develop early on, all of this running and running and running to eventually, like he says, be able to afford the life he's been living this whole time, always in debt, always in debt. And finally, now here we are, he's at middle age. He can finally afford all these things he wanted. He has them all and he can actually afford them. And he thinks he is stable. He's at that moment where he now is on cruise control. It all falls apart. And he needs cash flow to keep subsidizing all these things, to the fact that he's on paper still very successful, right? He's going to get some kind of severance package, but it's not enough because his lifestyle is still beyond even that. I love the chemistry, by the way, between him and his friend or financial advisor or friend / financial advisor. Great. I think that's one of the best relationships here in the show.
And they do a good job too in this episode of laying out why he needs so much money.
Right, exactly. Right.
We've seen the houses, we see his car, we see the daughter wants this facial treatment that it's only 3 times and it's $1,500 a session.
Right.
You get an idea of why the money is so stressful for him.
And we'll talk about his sister later on as well, but that's yet another thing. Just you can imagine he's wealthy enough to have an apartment for her, to take care of her, where so she doesn't have to work and pay her bills. That now is suddenly this burden on him, right? And of course, when you have that cash flow, it's easy enough to say yes to. And this is something that becomes even more pronounced. I mean, it's right there from the beginning when his friend asks him to make the same donation. And he says, well, I just went through a divorce. And then eventually he relents and gives in. This is where I think by episode 2, things to get more interesting in their examination of him. So much of this, you can imagine, downsize the house, move in with your sister. If he is honest with the people in his life that he is in this situation, because theoretically he just needs to tighten his belt for a year or 2 and he can then be back on his feet. He can find another job. He can wait for this clause to expire so that he can start soliciting from his existing clients. He could rebuild a new book. All these things are possible. He can move somewhere else where it's cheaper to live and start over, but he can't. He wants to critique this world he lives in, and yet he wants to be a part of it. All he's trying to do is save face. I don't want them to know what's happened to me. That's it. Because if he just acknowledged it, he would be able to resolve this issue pretty easily. But he'd rather turn to a life of crime.
Well, 2 comments about that. I mean, he literally says that in the 2nd episode.
Right.
About how stupid the country club is. But he also can't not be in the country club because then everyone would question why he's not in the country club. But also, it was unclear to me, maybe it was explained and I missed it. Does his family know that he lost his job?
It does not seem like his family knows that he lost his job.
Right? It doesn't seem like they know.
Okay. No, I'm pretty sure they do not.
I mean, that's a crazy secret to be keeping when they run in the same circles as his financial advisor and, but okay.
But he's only told him so far. So I am curious to know, like, eventually this word will leak out. Oh, I forgot to mention this, but there is a certain clock here. So it does make a little bit more sense, as far as like if he's going to pull this mirage of what his life actually is, and it's going to drag out for years, then it'd be like, well, how is that going to work? But it is interesting or important that we flash back 4 months to him having the hookup with that coworker. And then we flash back 1 month to the moment at the bottom of the stairs, right? So that is to say that this particular, his life of crime is going to intersect with the fatal consequences of that life of crime within a month.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Which is, by the way, I also like that time frame because we're probably 2 weeks into his crime spree right here. Things are going to get really serious probably within the next, I wouldn't say the next episode. I wouldn't be surprised at all if we're still going to be in this mode of just feeling out these characters. And we're going to understand the relationships between these characters a little bit more, his dynamic with his sister. And that's going to last another week or 2. And he's going to keep pulling off these petty crimes. And then things are going to get very serious. That's my guess as to how this is going to be structured. Another interesting thing that happens here, and again, it's kind of couched around the fact that his daughter is dating this older guy. And again, she could be like, your daughters will drive you crazy. Another one of these very much stereotypical midlife crisis type talking points. And we see by episode 2 that, she has her own strains. She's trying to get into Princeton. So she has her own dramas going on. So she is even more complex in that 2nd episode. But one thing that happens here, couched around all this, is that he goes to pick up a drum set because his son wants a new drum set, even though he still has the old drum set. Once again, you can imagine if you're like, hey, I just lost my job, you could just be like, we're not getting a new drum set. He can't say no to anything because he wants to keep this facade going.
And he wants to make his kids happy too, I think. I think that is part of it.
He does, but I think maybe this is part of his character as well. When you think about the fact that he's 2 years into this divorce and he's still pining for his wife. So maybe he's just the type of person who can't accept the fact that things have changed. He takes the drum set home once he catches his daughter and boyfriend naked. Not a great thing to see when you have a teenage daughter, of course. But then he takes the drum set home, and there's an indication there that maybe he played drums someday back in the day. We might even see a drum set back in that apartment. I have to double check. But maybe he was once aspiring to be something very different than what he is as this Wall Street broker.
Yeah, we learn a couple of things about his backstory. I'm sorry, I'm incapable of splitting up the episodes when we watch 2 episodes at once. It's very hard for me to restrain myself.
Sure.
But I agree with you. He played drums at a younger age. I don't think you just pick up drums the way he seemed to be
right.
In that clip. And we also learned that he played tennis at Princeton.
Right.
So, I think they're doing a nice job of filling in his backstory here and there.
Yeah, I think a lot of people probably have that experience of maybe he wanted to be a drummer. He was a teenager like his son playing drums in a band, and he had those aspirations. But like you said, he also was good at tennis. He got a scholarship to Princeton. And then once again, your life starts going on rails and, you don't become a drummer. It's tough to be a drummer, by the way. It's not like he'd just be a huge success as a drummer either. But,
But it doesn't have to be a career as a drummer. It could just be a hobby that you're passionate about, but life and kids take over. And there's no time even for the hobby that you loved that brought you so much happiness.
Exactly. What do you think of this whole portrayal? I think you're touching on a lot of this already, but what do you think of how we see his relationship with his family? Do you agree? Like, my perspective on it is that in that first episode, it's almost like we're seeing the cliche from his point of view. His boy won't talk to him. His daughter's in this relationship he doesn't agree with. His wife is flouting his affair on his face. She still wants to. Why can't we be friends anymore? And he's like, "What are you talking about? You betrayed me." It's all very much from his perspective. And then we'll talk about in more detail with episode 2, but we can preface it now that you start seeing that maybe there was something lacking as a husband, as a father, even that triggered a lot of these life changes. Like, and he hasn't taken account for those things. But what did you feel about how they portray his relationship with the kids here, and then more importantly, maybe how it gets more complex in episode 2?
I think I gave and am giving this character a wider berth than you are. I feel like, yes, there are a lot of cliches here, but to me, they are showing that he does care a lot about his kids and is trying to stay connected with them in his way, although, he may largely be failing.
Right. Another thing that I think along the lines of, and maybe this is where my bias is coming in, the next character I want to talk about is his relationship with Sam, played by Olivia Munn, where, again, in episode 1, just bitches be crazy. She shows up, she wants to hook up, and then she goes crazy, with him, after he is unwilling to commit. There's one way of reading it like, oh God, like I need this too. This also on top of everything else. I can't just have a fling with somebody. But I, again, feel like this is something that I assume is going to continue to get more complex. But we see a lot more of her point of view in episode 2.
Yeah, and we also see him let his guard down just a little bit in connection with her.
Yeah, and speaking of letting his guard down, something that is yet again, like, oh man, life is so hard for Jon Hamm, poor Jon Hamm, beautiful, handsome Jon Hamm. When we find out about his sister and she's, playing Radiohead on a lawn somewhere. Again, just another problem that women are making for Jon Hamm in episode 1. And I'm saying that sarcastically because I think that in episode 2, I have to say that episode 2 doesn't work for me as well as episode 1, but the dynamic between him and his sister and the dynamic when he goes home to see his family is fantastic. This relationship is so good in this show.
Well, The thing that is interesting to me about the sister, and I think this is not a cliche, actually, and maybe that's why I'm grappling with it. She seems to have some debilitating
Yes.
mental issues,
Mhm.
right? That makes it that she is unable to live independently. And he is being a really great brother to her in helping her and taking care of her. But also, she seems to be, as far as my exposure to characters in media, this is where I'm drawing all my inferences from. She's the most well-adjusted person with
Yes.
debilitating mental issues that I've ever seen depicted, because she seems to fully acknowledge and understand that about herself. And I think I'm not quite sure what to do with that type of character.
I actually kind of liked it. I have known people like retroactively found out that they were struggling with mental health problems, and they didn't seem to be like I know that people would have issues, but I didn't know that it was as debilitating, and I didn't really know about it. So maybe that's where I'm getting this my perception of this character. But I actually found that really refreshing. Oftentimes, they like to represent somebody having mental health problems. It's so over the top. Usually, like these people, like you can't imagine how these people have been functional at all in their lives. So I do like the fact that it seems to be, to your point, like a pretty subtle form of mental health problems. So whatever it is, maybe it
Yet
will become
debilitating somehow.
right. And maybe she, for example, is off her meds. And then we see when she moves in with him, she's like packing all her pills. So she is prepping to
Yeah.
be on her best behavior while she hangs out with her brother. I am curious to see how that part of it develops. I, in general, just really liked seeing that someone who is always even with his family, obviously with his friends, obviously at work, always performing. And I love Jon Hamm's performance. Once again, just going to keep going on about how great this is, that he is performing a version of himself in the show all the time. And then when he's with his sister, he's just talking to his sister. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like he's just being himself. And maybe that says something about this, underlying dynamic that you always have, with people who've known you your whole entire life. The subtlety of that is really well done, I thought.
Yeah, I think it's a great dynamic, and it shows that he can let his guard down with his sister. She seems to know everything that is happening for him. So I like all of that. I like the relationship. I wonder about how they're going to develop this issue of the mental health crisis or mental health issues that she's having, and whether that's going to become something that moves to the forefront more,
Yeah.
or whether they're just going to be zany roommates.
I mean, unfortunately, because I don't love this trope that much, I do think that there's going to inevitably be some situation where he's in his criminal mastermind mode and he's got some, big heist going on or something. And he gets the call that his sister is roaming, broke into
On
someone's
someone's
house and
lawn
yeah,
playing the
exactly.
guitar.
She's in her underpants running around at someone's backyard, like something's going to happen like that. So, but at this moment, I do like the fact that it's just kind of, they're both, accepting the limitations of their midlife and working it out together kind of beautifully, actually.
Mm-hmm, I agree.
And of course, he tells her everything. That's the other important point. We talk about how he doesn't tell anybody everything. He's not even 100% honest. He's pretty honest, actually, with his friend, his financial planner friend. So I guess that he has to pay him, and he also needs to, this guy's managing his money. So he probably does have to tell him exactly what's going on. He is his rabbi there to an extent. Of all the women in his life, for example, the only one he's being honest with is his sister. And of course, this all culminates. What do you think about this, turn to crime that he finally has? He has this resentment about this barbecue he's been invited to, and he has a bit of a chip on his shoulder, and he starts wandering around people's houses and walks into one of these giant walk-in closets, finds just a roll of cash, and that's the first thing he does: take this roll of cash and pockets it, and then he eventually comes back to this very house to do a watch ad. I don't know if this is a real watch. I'm not a watch guy.
I mean, a
But
Patek Philippe is definitely a real watch. I
okay,
don't know
well,
if this particular model is a
yeah,
real watch, but
I assume they are real then, if that's the case. A multi-$100,000 watch, that's pretty nuts. I can't
insane,
imagine spending
right?
that kind of money on a watch ever. Of course, you buy it as a status symbol, but then nobody wears watches anymore, right? That's the new thing too. So you can imagine someone buying themselves these status symbols or getting them as gifts. $250,000 status symbol watch. that they never watch. It's just sitting in, they never use, I should say. It's just sitting in a drawer somewhere. And he's just like, he won't even know this is gone. And he may very well be right.
Right.
So he absconds with the watch later that same week. And what did you think about this? Not only this first break-in, but of course the fact that the cops show up, and because he's just Jon Hamm answering the door, they're like, "Sorry to bother you, sir."
We're going to have to suspend disbelief a little bit, I
Yes.
think.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I'm willing to do that because this is so much fun. I think the original home invasion, wandering around the house,
Yep.
was understandable because they made it clear that he was drunk. You know, he had had quite a bit of whiskey at the barbecue and stressed out with everybody talking to him about $60,000 of tables and all of that. So I could kind of get while he was poking around. The premeditation to come back, you know,
Yeah.
that doesn't quite track for me in such a short time frame to turn to that level, to turn to a life of crime so shortly after he lost his job. But I'm willing to go along with it.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, you have to suspend a lot of disbelief here. The fact that they leave the houses unlocked, I think, is pretty realistic. The fact
Even
that,
when you go on vacation, though,
yeah, I agree. That's where I would say probably not. But you know, he does check all the doors, so you can always miss a door
yeah.
or a window. So I can understand that, especially when you have a big house. The other thing is like they don't have cameras in the house. Cameras are so cheap to have like a
This
camera system.
this is my biggest issue, realistically, about both the first and second episodes.
Yeah.
I'm not speaking from firsthand experience because I live in a apartment building. It's kind of a different situation, but my understanding, and from what I see on social media, is that everybody at this point has cameras on their house where they can track
Yes.
who comes and who goes, and when the UPS driver drops off a package, and whether somebody steals it or not. So it seems very unrealistic that they don't have cameras on their property that would alert them when somebody is there, especially when they're on vacation.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. It is so easy. I know people who have like nanny cams inside their house in case they have someone working in their house. So they're so cheap now, and so nondescript. You could just leave them around the house. Although I would say most people do not, that I know, have cameras inside of their houses. So that makes sense to some extent. However, what you're saying.
How about people with pets, though? Because we have friends who have a dog that are watching their dog while we're out.
Well, in this particular case, I don't think he's been in any homes that have pets, which of course would make things tricky too. So I think that is, maybe that's all intentional as well. But going back to your original point, the one thing that I don't buy at all, especially with affluent homes, is that they don't have cameras outside of the house. Like they definitely would have cameras. I mean, everybody, where we live, people would like forward us their Ring camera footage of us dropping off the candy or whatever. And of course, that's part of it, is like my daughter tries to drop the candy off when you're booing the neighbors without triggering the camera. You have to like sneak in from the side.
A motion activated light also possibly.
Yes. Sure. With a camera on it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And like I said, we actually have it where the kids will try to sneak in the homes when they're, trying to ding dong ditch the neighbors, which is something they like to do. So the kids know where the cameras are and they try to sneak around them. Even if we saw him scouting out, like, where are the cameras, and coming up with a path where he can subtly walk in this other way where there's no camera or something. But we just see him wandering through people's backyards. I'm like, that would never fly.
Right.
If some random guy with a hoodie was just walking through people's backyards, everybody in the neighborhood would be talking about it. But I guess we just have to believe that these people are so privileged in this area, which might be gated or whatever, has like no crime, which he does specifically say they have basically no crime in this place, that they such a utopian expectation there in that area that they wouldn't even imagine that is happening. I guess that's possible.
Yeah. And then also, if it's a gated community, I feel like the security people would know the owners.
Yes.
I mean, not necessarily know them well, but well enough that they'd say, you don't look like the guy that owns this house.
Right. Exactly. Like, isn't this where blah, blah, blah lives? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then he'd have to at least be like, oh, yeah, I'm driving them tomorrow. Like, he had to come up with something.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It all seemed a little too convenient there. But maybe that also is teaching us as viewers that we need to suspend our disbelief a little bit. And to be honest, I can imagine people this all bothering people. Some of the critiques we made here, some of the overwriting we described here. But for me, I am willing to suspend disbelief because
Agree.
I love this fantasy, every aspect of it. It really speaks to something that I talk about or I think about all the time. This idea that we are in love with this gaudy wealth. And then I personally am so critical of it, but then you keep falling to these traps as well. And I think culturally we all do. So just the fact that it's engaging with that, I find intriguing. I love the Jon Hamm of it all. Him as a criminal, like I love him being like, this guy's a jerk. I'm going to steal his watch. I like that. I think we all feel like that sometimes. So all of this is working for me. So I guess I'll just have to accept the fact that it's total baloney that
Yes.
he would be able to wander into these people's homes. But maybe all of this will be addressed, by the way. Maybe he pulls off a certain heist. Then people realize they're being robbed. Then they're like, oh, I guess we do have to get a security system. And then the cops are around. And now he has to do these crimes for this pawn shop that maybe he's, now under the gun, that he can be revealed if he doesn't do this. So all of this may be setting up stuff. But for now, it just seems preposterous.
That may be true. And one thing that occurred to me as I was watching it and questioning where the cameras were was, gosh, it's just a struggle in 2025 for people to come up with interesting plots that would not be thwarted by modern technology.
Exactly.
Right. Which is something we've talked about before, right? Like that's why they'll make an excuse. Oh, there's no cell signal in this area or whatever it may be. Everybody has to give up their phones for whatever contrived reason, because otherwise it's impossible to have a really interesting plot a lot of the time.
It's very hard to make a traditional police procedural or horror movie or any of these type of films because it's just like, oh, just track their phone. All right, episode 2, a couple of things I want to say about episode 2 right off the bat. I didn't like it as much as episode 1, but I liked certain aspects of it very much. I like that they make the characters more complex. But I want to start things off by saying this is a terrible title sequence, a truly terrible title sequence.
Right, with everything kind of
blowing
being
up,
uprooted behind him.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And I am a big fan of the Walkmen and of this vocalist in general. This is a terrible theme song. Terrible. So as a fan of this singer in general, I did not like the song at all. But in episode 2, this is called Deuce, by the way, which of course is the tennis reference we make towards the end of the episode.
And it's the second episode.
Right. Deuce. Very good point. What did you think about Andrew's friend has set him up with this job interview? And this whole thing where this is where we start to see that Andrew might be his own worst enemy. And he refuses to accept what the reality might be. He has an opportunity to have this job where he can basically coach this younger guy. That's probably just nepotism that this guy has this job in the first place. And instead of sucking it up and going like, this might be all I can do, and I could probably sustain my lifestyle as it is, he's like, nope, I'm not going to tell anybody this is happening. I want my lifestyle to stay exactly the same. And I am not compromising myself. I am not basically just going to be the salesperson to build up someone else's book, even if it is some kid who doesn't deserve it. And not only are you going to say that internally and be like, I'm going to weigh my options, you're going to chew this guy out and embarrass him and potentially hurt your friendship with one of your best friends and embarrass this kid too, all this in one shot.
This is a very realistic read that you just gave on the situation and what the character should do in his own self-interest. As a middle-aged person, however, who has worked with people younger than me, I loved Jon Hamm in his reaction to this kid. I loved him halfway through the conversation saying, whose son is he? It's completely clear. He's somebody's son. Otherwise, he wouldn't be here talking like this to me right now. I loved his very subtle, taken aback reaction when the kid starts saying, oh, your non-compete is not a problem for legal. He's kind of got that look on his face of like, who are you and why do you think you can insert yourself here? I understood why he was insulted at this offer. And I loved how he just went back at the partner there saying, it says as much about me as it does about you that we're having this conversation. I loved all of it. I thought it was super fun.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of fun, but I do think that they're saying something about the character here. We're not hearing this as an internal monologue, which would be funny in and of itself. It is, once again, this wish fulfillment of all the things you wish you could say here as well. But it does seem like he is not doing himself any favors here.
Well, he's a prideful person. That's clear.
For sure. Yeah. But I also, once again, I go back to the idea that I don't think he is willing to accept the fact that things are changing, right? He wants what he had
Because he's
before.
prideful. Yeah.
Yeah. I also like the fact that, I think the women in general were very one dimensional in episode one and intentionally so, I think. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention in episode one, he also turns out to be a huge movie fan for some reason. He has posters of like classic movies all over the place. He is watching an old black and white movie in the basement. He's definitely seen Sunset Boulevard, by the way. But he's watching this movie in this beautiful movie theater basement, which I wish I had something like that, while he's drinking this 25-year-old aged whiskey. So another thing I'd love to be doing while I was watching a movie in a basement.
Also smoking a joint, I think.
And smoking a joint at the same time. Yes, exactly. Like, man, he's just, you know what?
Living the life.
Even if he's just, yeah, exactly. Even that, by the way, if he was just squatting in people's houses when they were, they weren't around and luxuriating in all these opulent things they have around them that they don't even take advantage of, even that is a fun fantasy to have beyond the actual like pawning their goods on the black market. But speaking of complexifying these women, we have Liv did not go to HR.
So this is where I get to say my thing.
Yes,
so
please do. Yeah.
I was so happy this ended up this way.
Yeah.
Because with the premise being you're losing your job because this woman that you slept with once is complaining about you because she didn't make VP. All I could think about during the first episode, well, not all I could think about, but one thing, the same type of woman who would go to HR and complain about that would have come to him first and said, I want this job. I want this title. And if you don't give it to me, I'm going to go to HR. I mean, if it really was a means to an end in that way, if she was the type of person to do that. So it wasn't tracking to me that if she was manipulative like that, she would have gone straight to him to try and get what she wanted rather than filing a complaint with HR.
And I also like the fact that they bring her back in when she is basically offered a job with Corbin Burnson, and because she susses out immediately that he might be making a sexual proposition there as well. So she's like, I'll go to dinner with you, but I need to bring somebody with me. She doesn't trust him at all. And I found all of that intriguing because I think she is going to be, rather than being, I almost felt like sometimes with a movie specifically, often, or series as well, but oftentimes with movies, there'll be that kind of scene at the beginning where there's a woman and a man at a bar talking or whatever, and it's never comes back because she's just gone.
You never see them again. Yes,
exactly. She's just there as a device or plot point, or for him, the protagonist, to say his thing, like we did see here specifically. And I thought she might just be gone from the show, but I have a feeling that she is going to be fleshed out, and maybe she'll be inside of the organization, and there might be some bigger scam that he tries to pull, and she might be his inside person for that. So I do look forward to all of that, especially if she starts to see how shady what's going on there happens to be. But I did like her confrontation with him. I like that she's becoming a more complex character. Obviously, I like that Amanda Peet, as the wife here, the ex-wife, we find out that she has a real relationship with this guy. He's not just some idiot. They seem to have a sweet relationship, but at the same time, she doesn't seem to be that satisfied. She may very well be going through the same existential crisis that her husband is. And that would be really interesting too, that they are both dealing with this apart, rather than, once again, if they were maybe honest about it, they could have saved the marriage potentially.
First of all, who could take any guy seriously that drives that kind of van? First of all.
That's true.
Okay.
Although he is like it's apparently like an all-star NBA player, multiple rings. So
3 times.
That gets you a lot of credit.
I don't know if I could ever look past that van, but maybe. So I loved the insight into her day. I had assumed she was some sort of stay-at-home mom.
Same thing. Yep.
And I thought that even through seeing her go to the yoga class.
Right.
Then they show that she actually is a therapist, seemingly some sort of child psychologist or teenage years maybe, which is so interesting as we know that she's a mom with kids in the same age range, it seems,
Yep.
as the kids she's talking to, which I personally always thought whenever I had a friend whose parent was a therapist, I thought like that must be very difficult to have a parent who's a
Right.
therapist because they constantly think they are constantly analyzing you and trying to get to the bottom of things. And sometimes it's just not that serious. But anyway, when she's talking with the one patient about how he keyed a car and his anger,
Yep.
how he just feels this anger vibrating and he has to let it out some way. She has this look of recognition in her
Exactly.
face.
hmm
I thought maybe because of how underdeveloped she had been in the first episode, she was reflecting back onto Coop, that she was thinking she saw that in him sometimes. So I really love the payoff of this that we see later, where she's the one that's vibrating with anger
Right.
sometimes and needs to let it out and ends up keying some poor stranger's car in the parking
Yeah,
lot.
exactly. Innocent bystander there.
I thought that was a really, for me, unexpected development that I really liked about her character.
Once again, what the episode 2 wasn't as compelling to me as episode 1 after we kind of had the full setup of everything. And the plot wise, everything moves forward relatively little. But I loved in episode 2 some of the character work and definitely the wife and all of it. Like, even when you see Amanda Peet, who's so good, by the way, and doesn't work that much anymore.
Always great.
And she it pulls into the driveway and we see her with her new boyfriend and he's playing basketball out on the driveway and she has this look of she's content, she's happy to see him, but there's some longing there still. And then of course they play basketball against each other and they seem to have this really sweet dynamic. So of course we see them in episode 1 and it's like, how could you betray me? And then you see, no, they actually do like each other. She was unsatisfied for reasons we probably don't even understand yet, or maybe just some ennui that she's dealing with.
She says to him, I think it's in the first episode, you're always on me about what I did and that's fair, but what about your part in this?
Right. Yeah. So we don't know the details of that. I don't think remains to be seen. I don't actually think, if I had to guess, that he was unfaithful to
No,
her.
I don't think so either.
I think that maybe it's like he was working too much. He was never around. We even see that the son mentions at one point that it's like, well, what's really the difference that now that you guys are divorced? So maybe he just was never around anyway.
Which, by the way, this is like the golden handcuffs of this type of situation,
right,
is that your family is accustomed to a certain lifestyle. How is that happening, do you think, unless someone is working very hard to support it?
Exactly. And that's always the case, right? You want everything. And I mean, that's, once again, maybe the cultural critique that's being made here is that very idea that you work more and more and more, and you lose more and more and more of what makes you yourself to earn more and more and more. And then eventually you're like, then you get so caught up in these status symbols because it's all you have. And then you don't want to release them because it's like you're addicted to them. And it's like, yeah, but what is all this for? And I think that's what is being explored here. Obviously, if he was still climbing the corporate ladder and making a lot of money and his kids were getting everything they wanted and his wife was happy with the way things were, then everything would just keep proceeding as usual. But that's the point, right? Is that, things he's come off the rails basically here. And now it's like he has to suddenly reassess everything that he's been living for. He's wearing those golden handcuffs as well, basically.
Oh, absolutely. And I think we also see some of Amanda Peet's character questioning her relationship with the basketball star in that amazing pool scene at the country club, which I loved. Everything about that was fantastic. And, they're saying, her girlfriends are saying like, well, it's been a while now, right? Like you guys are completely established as a couple. And she says, not so fast. We're not living together. I still like to have my own bed.
Exactly. And so, that she has her hesitation about that. And yeah, I mean, I think the keying the car thing at the end, especially when you have that reference point, that it's someone who's raging inside. So what is her rage? Yeah. What's driving her rage?
Yeah. Well, by the way, as a middle-aged woman, I think part of the rage might be perimenopause, but
yes, my wife is dealing with that herself. So, and I also think that it's interesting when you think about over the course of this episode, which is pretty fun, like the slapstick of him having to switch cars and driving around with the butt truck all over the place
Yeah.
to move his sister. And I like how he keeps having to swap his car for other lower cars. And this one is very funny. But of course, he shows up when he gets that booty call. He shows up at Olivia Munn's house, this giant palace. And of course, after the pool scene where she turns out, we discover,
So
was
good.
one of the waitresses at one of these places. And when she was younger, she was that hot young thing that he wanted, that her out of shape but incredibly wealthy husband wanted. And now he has a new young thing that's hanging off his arm. And she, again, making her more complex here as well, she's driven to be with the Jon Hamm character, Andrew, by the fact that they both were cheated on to some extent. And then how she's like, I want affirmation. So I was going to yell at you today, but instead I just want to
Hmm.
have sex so I could feel
Very
sexy again.
human.
Exactly.
Very human.
So that I find a lot of fun. And of course, when he shows up in the car and she's like, no, we're going to have sex inside the car. So
Yes.
that, like, the next time he drives that car, he's, basically in the car where we had sex. So
Yes.
all of that is like the little vengeance behind all of these action activities. They also, his sister specifically calls out later on that they both have pretty limited options because they're the only divorcees in the neighborhood anyway.
Yes.
And apparently this is their entire social circle, is that neighborhood. So do you want to talk about the pool scene a little bit more, just the dynamic between the different women?
Yeah, I loved this. I felt like it was just like all of this was for me very fun to watch. I loved the ladies talking with each other and catching up, and then seeing the woman across the pool and how that is Olivia Munn's ex-husband's new girlfriend,
Mm-hmm.
and I kind of trying to support her through it. And there was a comment of like, there she was in the flesh, and it was a lot of flesh.
Yeah, a lot of flesh.
Something like that. I loved that. It just felt like a very genuine depiction of female friendships that I appreciated. The idea of like, when you're ready, we're going to find you the perfect guy. All of that. I
Yeah,
liked it.
that
And
obviously they don't know
then,
what's going on.
yes. And then I liked also the scene between Jon Hamm, between Coop and his son, Hunter, I think it is. I'm trying to use character names when I can actually recall them,
Right.
where he sees his son, he immediately knows he's stoned. So
Yes.
I like that. And I like the idea of like, okay, we're going to do this. You got to go switch keys with your mom. And he's kind of saying, do I really have to? And that you did the crime, you do the time. And just like
Mm-hmm.
sending his
Yes.
kid out there to negotiate that with the mom. I liked all of that.
Yeah, I like that as well. And I also like that the son is so disengaged so much. But then I love, and we got to talk about this, I love when he takes his son along with him to this incredible, like my skin was crawling. This is not how my family dynamic is at all, but it is felt so specific and so real. I really feel like there's some autobiography in this depiction of this family. They show up at the house. He needs his sister to stay with the
Mhm.
parents temporarily because obviously this is a big expense on him. He shows up there. The mom is absolutely terrible. The dad has come up with his own ways to deal with this mom by being mostly oblivious and just paying attention to like the least consequential thing at the moment in each one of these. The son is watching all of this, saying, eventually saying, "Grandma's pretty terrible."
Yes.
And of course, that he knows right away that they don't want the sister there. She still is talking about this. Is another thing that's such realistic about parents. She's still talking about, well, she ruined her life by walking out on her marriage. It's like
Hmm.
she had a mental
A
breakdown
psychotic break. Yes.
and she didn't do it on purpose to hurt you, mom. Oh God, this was like honestly made my skin crawl, but it was very
But
believable,
again, I mean,
dynamic.
maybe at this point she's back on her meds, but
Yes.
shockingly untriggered by her parents, this woman.
Right. Yes. All true. But I love the fact as well that he's like, okay, good. I'm just going to drop her off. He goes upstairs and he realizes this is a real
Hmm.
love he has for his sister
Yes.
and empathy that she hasn't even prepped her bed or anything. So obviously she has no intention of this actually going through. And she's like, okay, change of plans. You're coming home with me. And
Yes.
which might be, one thing that does ground him because, we see him in that beginning of episode 1 in that depressive, shades drawn apartment or house, I should say. And he does not seem to be in a good state. He actually seems to be much warmer than anybody else than in any other scenes in this entire show when he's with his sister. So maybe it's all for the best.
And I liked, adding more shading to the character when Hunter says, "You can have my room. I'm barely there anyway." There's like
Right.
a flicker of sadness across
Yes.
Jon Hamm's
Right.
face.
Exactly. Absolutely. Speaking of sons here, what did you think of when he does decide to actually spend the night with Olivia Munn's character? I keep calling her by her character name.
I know, I have
Sam,
to.
Sam,
Sam. Mhm.
Sam. And her son is awakened in the middle of the night and he runs into him and then he goes and tucks him in. There seems something, he seems put off, like I didn't want this interaction to occur, but there is something kind of touching about him with this younger child. And obviously, what maybe he missed out on with his kids.
Yeah, I thought it was a very sweet scene and very realistic, as anyone who's been a parent of a child that age knows. And I think, yeah, even, and I would assume you feel this way too. Sometimes I look at my kid who is not all that old, but I think back on that sweetness of being a
Yeah.
toddler, or this kid seems maybe 5 years old or so.
Yeah.
Uh, and I miss it. And to relive a day with your kid at that age would be such a bittersweet thing. And so I think it was, yeah, partly that, and partly, as you made that point, that maybe he wasn't around
Yeah.
that many nights to bring the kid back to bed and get the stuffy. And will you sit with me? That's the one my kid always says. Will you sit with me until he falls back asleep? All of it.
Yeah, and it's interesting that his son mentions like I'm never there, and that he doesn't seem to be that close to his son, even though he can spot that he's high and he's being judgmental about him. And it's very funny to think that they are both drummers. Like, why wouldn't you bond with your son over that? Maybe it's because honestly he hasn't played the drums at all until he suddenly is just stuck at home with the drum kit, given the circumstances. But maybe that's what that, and maybe he will. Maybe this is part of that evolution. We'll see here. So. I hope so, anyway.
I think that would be a fun turn of events.
Did you want to say anything else about this horrible family dynamic? The mother, what a terrible mother. Speaking of stereotyped female characters, that's terrible mom. But this seems very specific. This doesn't seem stereotypical at all, actually.
Yeah, it was rough. I kind of hope that we don't see the parents anymore.
I mean, I hope they use them like the way they use them now to create some kind of context. But yeah, I don't want them to be on every episode. It would be a real downer.
I feel like I got what I needed to get about what happened in this family.
Exactly. Yeah, they better not be shown up on a regular basis because that would be rough, really rough. And of course, I want to just touch on his relationship with his sister again. She seems to be manic here. She has bought like every breakfast food imaginable, but forgot the milk apparently, and decided to make them all. They have every cereal they used to eat when they were kids, but she's also seems to have made eggs and French toast, and she went crazy. And I like how at one point she goes, "Don't worry, I'll clean all this up afterwards." And he's like, "No, you won't." She's like, "Probably not."
I missed that.
So yeah, there'll be a little more of seeing them. And, of course, very importantly in that conversation, you see that he has told her everything just as they're speaking. She knows about the affair. She knows about the losing his job. The one thing she doesn't know about is that he is stealing from the neighbors and selling it to the pawn shop. I think it's the last thing we need to talk about. I didn't even mention this character, but he went with this expensive watch in episode 1, I believe, or beginning of episode 2. Hard to remember where it was at this point, but went to the pawn shop. This legitimate pawn shop goes, "Oh, I'll give you like $250,000 for this. I just need the paperwork." Of course, he doesn't have the paperwork. Not for nothing, buddy, but next time, look for the paperwork. That's what I got to say.
Yeah, I feel like it must be there somewhere.
It's got to be. You're not going to throw that. What if you need to resell your $250,000 watch? You want those papers. So he should look a little more thoroughly, but he doesn't find the papers. And I understand him not wanting to go back for them, but he should have thought about that the next time. Anyway, so he gets sent from that pawnbroker to another one, who is this character, Lou, who she is willing to sell the watch, but only for $65,000. I love the negotiation, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
That was a lot of fun. He tries to get the price up. She drops it even more. And he goes, wait a second. I thought you started at 65. He goes, look, you negotiated. Congratulations.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, back to the price she was at. 65,000 is pretty good. Probably subsidizes him for a little while. Of course, he would prefer to have like $250,000 and pay his bills with, I would assume, no matter how much money he's making, between $250,000 in cash, no less, right?
Mm-hmm.
And whatever his 6-month or his exit package was from his previous business, the previous firm, that would probably subsidize him for a while. But of course, it's not going to be that easy. He's stealing these things, so the prices he gets are going to be lower. And of course, the second time he goes back with another watch, expecting another 60 grand that will probably subsidize him for the next few months, he doesn't get it because she's like, nope. But she's also very curious about him, and she decides to, I guess, reach out to someone she knows in law enforcement to have his plates run. So, what did you think about this setup for this character? How do you like this character, and what do you think she's setting up for the show?
First of all, funny running gag about how the trunk keeps flipping
Yes.
open because the
Mhm. Yeah.
daughter's boyfriend hit his car.
Mhm.
I like that in the
Oh, that's
Maserati.
definitely going to pay out. There's going to be a body back there or something when it's going to
It
pop open.
feels like it. It sure feels like it. So I like this character. I like what they're establishing as, it's not all fun times when you steal your neighbor's stuff. You got to figure out what to do with it.
Right, exactly.
And it actually reminds me kind of Weeds. Did you watch that show?
I tried to. I never really got into it.
Yeah, with the premise being this suburban housewife whose husband drops dead, turns to selling marijuana, which at this point in 2025 does not seem all that scandalous.
How quaint.
But
How quaint.
I just get your proper license. But
Exactly. Just open a shop on the corner.
back then it was an illicit thing to do. And then, she had to engage with a series of kind of unsavory characters in order to make this enterprise work so she could support her family. So I feel like, they're introducing the darker side of this. And I like Lou. I think she's interesting. I wouldn't mind seeing more of her. What did you think?
I think we're going to see a lot more of Lou, to be honest. But yeah, I liked her. It's one of the scenes that probably worked least well for me is when she comes out there and the guy comes in with a knife and she threatens to shoot him.
Mm-hmm.
And Jon Hamm's character, Coop, Andrew, I guess any of those, he goes by.
I like Coop.
Yeah, he seems fascinated by watching her on camera. So maybe just a sign of things to come that he may take to this criminal world. Point being that maybe he starts to like the criminality rather than just needing it, right? Which
Just
seems
like
to be
in
the
Weeds.
case because you assume that a guy like this could probably get a job that makes half as much money as he does now.
I feel like he could become a consultant of
Absolutely.
some sort.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say is I think at some point he's going to like the criminal lifestyle rather than this being a necessity, because like you said, you could just become a consultant and be honest with your family and say, look, we can't afford a $400,000, $500,000 a year lifestyle. We're going to have to cut back to like a $250,000 or $300,000 a year lifestyle, which is still pretty damn good. And if they complain about it, be like, look, those annoying people at the country club, we're not doing that anymore. That's it, right? Yeah. He doesn't have to give up that much. So I do think that he's going to be like, hey, if I can make $500,000 a year cash by just stealing stuff from my neighbors and they don't even know I'm doing it, I'm going to do that. Although then people are going to start asking questions when he doesn't have a job, but he somehow still has the money.
Well, he kept talking about, and I'm not sure I quite understand this reference, getting his capital account. Who knows how much money is in there, but maybe he could just tell people he got his capital account as part of the agreement.
That's a good point. And maybe he can get the capital account. Maybe that's why we still have that connection inside, potentially a way to get his hands on it. Corbin Burnson, going back to that scene, it is kind of a nightmare scenario for people who do have this kind of lifestyle. Imagine that you have this capital account and you assume, because that's how it's structured, that you may have millions of dollars in there potentially that you can touch anytime you want. Corbin Burnson goes, that's my money. And he goes, no, that was that's basically my capital account, which, in the parlance of this business means that it's your personal account, but it's not your personal account. It's the money that's been allocated to you under the auspices of the business. And he's just like, that's not under your name. It's
Yeah.
mine, which is really messed up. Maybe that is a little bit of a limitation of the show of making him that living that high in the hog. Like if he was trying to pretend that he was that rich, but just barely scrounging by, but making someone really that rich, that it start to be like he has to have some means somewhere. Don't they have like a rental property that, whatever, like a lake house, and then he could live in the lake house or just sell it without anybody knowing and live off of that? Like there probably would be things like that in a real situation,
Right.
like some kind of investment property. Some would complicate all of this. But, hey, it's all part of the setup. Fine. So how did you feel overall about this? Excited for the next episode?
Definitely looking forward to it. And, just again, as we said, I think so much is being carried on the strength of all of the acting here, and particularly Jon Hamm. I mean,
yes, absolutely.
This is a great vehicle for him. I think he's really getting to do a lot of the things that he does very well, and that's entertaining to watch.
Yep, agreed. So yeah, I'm very much looking forward to it. I want to know more about all these characters, which is not always the case for these type of shows. And he is great in the role. And honestly, even if the show is a bit of a disappointment, I probably would just keep watching it for his performance. I am enjoying it so far. I'm curious to know how general audiences will react to this, though. I'm curious to see what that reaction might be. I have heard critics have seen the entire show, and some of the reviews have been negative, by the way.
Really?
But I do hear that the second half of the season is a different show than the first half of the season. So
interesting.
People who were like, oh, I thought there would be more crime, or I thought this would be more like Breaking Bad. You may get your wish. I have not seen ahead, so I don't know what happens. But, given the way this episode opens, we probably are going to, the stakes are probably going to get much higher. And all this fooling around and stealing watches for some extra cash because he's too prideful to compromise the type of job he is willing to take. And then all of a sudden he's like implicated in a murder or something. Now he is obviously under the gun and the stakes have completely changed. So
not
I assume
fun and games anymore.
Not fun and games anymore. Yeah. I assume this is not going to be as much fun for him once, might be fun for us to watch him be trapped.
Well, you said too, and I think I learned this from you, that part of the premise of this show is that in connection with breaking into people's houses, he discovers some of their dark secrets, right?
Yes, that has been the setup in even in the trailer for the season trailer. So maybe
and
that
we saw
is,
that one couple had the SAT key, right?
Oh,
SAT
good point. We forgot to bring that up. Yes, so that speaks to another level of this. And yes, so that might be the first of these mysteries that he starts to unravel. And who knows? Maybe he stops stealing stuff and maybe he starts blackmailing people. I didn't even think about that, but maybe it's not all about pawning goods. And because that would be limited over time, maybe that's the where things are headed here. And maybe that's what Lou really wants to see. If she can put the screws to him, maybe she's like, there's a much bigger prize here and he's just not seeing it. Yeah, that's intriguing. I had kind of forgotten that part of the preview. That could be interesting. Right.
Could be good, right?
I'm even more intrigued now. Even more intrigued.
Yeah.
And it would also bypass all the how is he breaking into these people's houses and all that stuff if that's no longer the case.
Yeah, that's a good point. Blackmail seems like a much safer bet for him, honestly.
And much more. I mean, you can get a lot more money from blackmail than by stealing a watch, even if it is a $250,000 watch. But I mean, especially think about these people. Imagine you're like, I can't afford to give you $200,000. Dude, sell one watch.
Yeah. Find your paperwork in your box.
Exactly. You can get 4 times as much, but you know what? Or give me that watch. You give me that watch and the papers for it.
Yeah.
And we're done. All right. Very much looking forward to that. Thanks so much again, Sona, for the conversation. And everybody, stay tuned. Watch the feed. We'll be talking about Mobland. We'll be talking about the Black Mirror, or I will be doing a solo episode about Black Mirror, and my impressions of the premiere episode of The Last of Us, which is premiering this very Sunday. So stay tuned for all of that. Thanks again, Sona.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.